Hi everyone, welcome to MIAC's Artist and Scholar Dialogue series, where MIAC staff and curators will be speaking with different artists, anthropologists, and archaeologists about their work, the impact the pandemic has had on their research or artistic practices, and just what they've been up to in the past several months. My name is Lilia McEnany, and I'm a curatorial assistant at the museum, and today we'll be chatting with Mateo Romero, a painter from Cochiti Pueblo. Along with his brother Diego, Mateo was MIAC's 2019 Native Treasures Living Treasure, and last year we worked together to put together an exhibition of their work, The Brothers Chongo, a tragic comedy in 2 parts, which unfortunately closed earlier this year. But Mateo's work will also be featured in MIAC's renewal of our permanent exhibition, Here Now and Always, which is set to open in 2022. So it's safe to say that we're big Romero fans at the museum. But before we start chatting with Mateo, I'd like to briefly acknowledge the place where this conversation is happening, even though we're chatting virtually, in Ogopoge within the Tewa World. As a non-native person living in so-called Santa Fe, I am a guest in the ancestral homelands of the Tewa people. And I wish to acknowledge all of the native people, past, present, and future, who walk on these lands. And so now we can get started. So Mateo, thank you for joining us.
I'm out in Poswage today. Yeah.
Okay. So for those of the viewers who don't know you, why don't we start with an intro, who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your practice.
Sure. Firstly, I like to say I love that you have those Tewa names for Santa Fe, Ogopoge, and Pohuaki is Poswage, because in my work I do a lot of landscape painting, and it's a lot of northern New Mexico space. And I use the original Tewa words, the names for the spaces that I paint. So I love that there's a etymology and a history that's indigenous that kind of comes out. So I just wanted to say thank you for doing that, because I do that in terms of what I'm trying to accomplish with my landscape work. And this is native land and native space, and it's also related to Alfonso Ortiz and what he wrote in Tewa World. And he was on my MFA review committee at UNM years ago, and some of his writing is really interesting. He talks about time, space, and becoming in the Tewa world, and how these ideas of language and name and place are linked to a kind of existential idea of being, and sort of what constitutes being in a kind of human sense for Pueblo people and for people. So I just want to say thanks for that. My name is Mateo Romero. I'm Cochiti Pueblo tribal member. I'm a painter, and I do a variety of different types of painting. Earlier on in my career, I was probably most known for doing mixed media photographic Pueblo dancers, where I'd take images, usually from my own photography, of Rio Grande Pueblo dancers, and I'd place those in canvases and then paint back on top of that and back into it with acrylic paint. Recently, I've shifted into more landscape work, and I've been using oil paints and palette knife for some very direct, all palette knife, very physical surfaces. And as I touched on earlier, these are northern New Mexico landscapes. These are the Tewa world, and we do bring out the original names of the places and talk about the history and the etymology of the space.
Absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit about the painting behind you? It's absolutely gorgeous.
Sure, thank you. This is a large format. It's figure ground. It's native horse riders. It's a very expressionistic use of color, kind of romantic color, linked to romanticism, and it's got very expressionistic brushwork. It's figure ground. If I move my head a little bit, you can see it's got some really interesting shadows and reflections in the water in front of the riders. And in that respect, it's kind of an homage to Earl Biss' work. He's a Crow painter who does the horses and the riders with the reflections in the water, and it's based in earlier existing work. It references earlier paintings of that type.
That's something that I really love about your work. Like in the Mondo Pueblo one, where you have the rabbit for Julie Buffalo Head. I think that's just such a unique thing
Oh,
to
yeah.
actively, like, you know, acknowledge your colleagues and friends. It's very cool.
The painter David Solly has a quote which I love, and he says that all painting references existing earlier painting. And I love that idea, which means, you know, in a sense that there's a syntax or language that painters speak.
Mm-hmm.
You know, David Solly also writes in one of his monographs about painters, uh, you know, using this language, developing a language. But it is based in other painting. All painting is based in existing painting. So it's a kind of it's a reference or a language or a syntax that painters speak, and that it begins in the work of other artists. Solly says, and I believe that that there is a kind of quest that painters engage in, which is to find core paintings which speak directly to them and which have what he calls core or kind of a vision embedded in them. And yeah, I have found that in Earl Biss's work, and also in Julie Buffalo Head's work, and also, you know, in David Solly's work, and in Lucian Freud's work, and in Elmer Bischoff and Bay Area landscape painters, and Nathan Oliveira, and you know, there's this really, you know, Matisse, going back to Matisse, and later Diebenkorn with the figurative stuff. So there is a history or syntax, and most artists, most painters that are fluent in what they're doing or fluent in the medium of paint are pretty aware. They're pretty aware of the history of painting, the idea that all painting is based in and is a reference to existing painting. So when I find something like a little Julie Buffalo Head moment, which really speaks to me, I try and, you know, kind of lift that out and use it in my own work in a way that's not you know, it's not plagiarism, but it's a reference or sort of an homage. And with the Earl Biss stuff, you know, once again, I'm trying to find something which is core and using it in a way which is my own, using my own voice, but also it does have a very, you know, there's a very conscious reference to what he was doing in terms of the shadows and the light and the reflection on the water and that kind of atmospheric quality in painting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So, how has the pandemic changed your artistic practice? Has it changed how you paint or what you paint or how you think about painting?
Well, it's changed everything. I'm not sure it's changed the painting so much. It's changed my life tremendously. It's been difficult, you know, in terms of, we talked about this earlier. My studio hasn't been open, so that's shifted, you know, physically how I've been doing the paintings. I did some paintings earlier on that were responses to the pandemic. I don't know if you saw it, but I did a piece which I posted it on Instagram, I think, and maybe on Facebook, and it was because people weren't actually going into spaces to look at paintings, so there wasn't a physical venue. But I did a painting of two native figures in a car with they had these little, you know, face masks on, and they're lifting up guns, and I think I called the piece "Signifying Virus," and it was kind of at the beginning of the pandemic. So there was actually an attempt to sort of, you know, grapple with some of that stuff as it came out, which I thought was pretty successful. I mean, I enjoyed the process, but ultimately speaking, in a more complete sense, I don't think it's really changed the painting so much. I think it's changed, you know, people. It's changed me. It's changed how I do things. People aren't going into physical spaces to look at shows or exhibits. I'm sure as a museum space, you've experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
And just talking with dealers and you know, everything's happening virtually. It's all, you know, all exhibits and sales and all kind of, you know, publications are happening online. It's all online platforms, which is a huge shift. You know, we just went through the Indian market here, and that's really the high watermark of Santa Fe native arts in the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no physical face-to-face. There was no opening. There were a handful of openings, but they weren't heavily attended, and people were doing everything on digital platforms. So
Yeah.
with
How have you
varying,
found that?
I found it, surprisingly, I found it really, really good for me. I mean, I was able to adapt to that format. I have younger college age kids who take all my stuff and put it up and do what needs to happen for me, because I'm not very literate with any of this electronic stuff. I'm kind of semi-literate with digital information and computer, apps and how it all works. But I have younger kids who do it all. And if I need someone to do something like take a photograph, I can hire people locally that will do the work for me and make it happen for me. So we didn't have any problems adjusting to that or making, changes. And it was really good for us. We used Swaya and their ArtSpan connection. And ArtSpan is a partnership with Swaya that they used to push their virtual market nationally. So we had great sales and attention out of state from people that weren't, Indian market collectors. There were new collectors that were looking at landscape, and this type of landscape we're doing, this heavily painted, very physical, very muscular landscape. And they responded to that. It wasn't looked at as a regional type of work. It was just looked at as American painting. Mm-hmm. And it hit well for us in Northern California and Utah, of all places. We had heavy interest from collectors outside of the Native American, collecting realm from Utah. So we did really good with that. I know that artists, maybe older Native artists that didn't have support from their own family or from people, that were able to help them translate their work into this digital format, they probably didn't do so well. When we looked at the ArtSpan stuff and the Swaya stuff, and a lot of artists didn't have home pages to link to. They didn't have the complete, situation wasn't complete for them because of whatever reasons, So I think that one of the things that's, I've identified as being potentially difficult for older Native populations is they're not digitally literate. I'm not digitally literate, but I have people that work with me who do this for me. And if you don't have if you don't have kids in college right now, at least in high school, it might be hard to access that, people to do all this stuff. So there's a generation gap, where people over the age of maybe 55 might be left out of this. Native people over the age of 55 could be left out of this digital experience.
Yeah, and it's not just digital literacy, it's also just reliable access to internet that is another part of the problem. So, I mean, on one hand, you're really getting an amazing increase in audience, like you said, but what are the trade-offs there for different people? I think it will be interesting to see what parts of this online pivot endure post-pandemic. If Swaya or different art markets will continue with the online markets and maybe do a hybrid version of some kind, or where do you think that's going to go?
I think that's the direction it's going. We had information from other artists. I was talking to Tewa Romero, my sister-in-law, and she does wonderfully nationally off of her own website. She pushes her own work, and she's been doing this and for a long time. It's been really good for her. And she's been telling me for like maybe a couple of years now that I had to do this. I had to get national, and I had to kind of, push my own message, my own work. And I was kind of complacent. I just thought, well, I have this kind of regional coverage, and I've got a local Santa Fe art dealer, and I'm doing pretty well. I don't know that I need to do all this extra work. And when the ArtSpan thing happened nationally with Swaya, it really opened my eyes up. She was absolutely right. She hit the nail on the head. There is a larger national audience. As it's this bigger market, and it's not regional. It's American painting, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
they're looking at work, and they're collecting work and promoting it. And I was off. I was mistaken. I underestimated what I was doing, and I underestimated myself and my audience. And when I did put my feet into this larger national audience, it was great. I mean, it is the way of the future. The way of the future will be these hybrid markets where we're meeting face to face with the collectors we know, and the collectors we know, the audience hasn't changed so much for 20, 30 years. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's been pretty homogenous. There hasn't been an influx of new collectors under the age of 65 in native art. I imagine you've experienced a lot of that at the museum. You probably have the same docents and the same patrons and the same donors and the same people, same audience. It's pretty homogenous from Santa Fe to Taos to Scottsdale. We have you know, the same. It's kind of, you know, it's a little bit static. And then when you so going forward, I think that this digital, you know, platform with this possibility to go national with partnerships with places, you know, organizations like ArtSpan, I think that will be the future, because it breaks the native art experience out of a regionalism. And if you know, if the artist is ready, it moves their work into an American art experience. You become an American painter in a sense, or you have access to collectors who are into um, American painting or American sculpting. It's not a regionalism. It's an American kind of moment, right? And many of the native artists I know are ready for that. There's amazing sculptors and painters and jewelers and videographers and filmmakers, and people are ready to put their work out in a national context. And so I think going forward, it will be that model you're talking about, the hybrid model. It would be nonsensical not to have all the tools at your disposal. It would be kind of retrograde not to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And now that we know that it is possible, I mean, why not? And I think it's also
We always knew, we just
well,
didn't take it serious. You know, we became
yeah.
complacent because people take care of us so well here, and we have this following, and people, you know, people love us, and we love the community, and people do so much for us as artists here. And so it gave a kind of complacency that it wasn't, you know, necessary to change or to grow or to challenge yourself. But once you do those things, you understand that there's a broader audience, and that's an amazing thing, to be able to move from a regionalism in your art and your mentality and your aesthetic into just a mainstream experience. And
Yeah, absolutely. And I
that's a
mean,
beautiful thing. Yeah.
yeah, and we're seeing that. I think it's in line with a lot of the conversations that are going on in museums and in academia about what American art is, right? Like the Met just hired their first full-time curator of Native art in their American section.
I read
So,
that. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so I think it's
Conversely,
just,
there are 4 major museums that canceled a Philip Guston retrospective because he's dealing with Ku Klux Klan imagery and the American experience and the history of America. And so there's also been a failing in museums. You know, there's been some museums that have risen up, and like you're saying, the Met is taking on this challenge, and they're struggling with it. And other museums have actually turned away from controversy and from having meaningful discourse at a time in America when race is so central to what's happening in the public discourse. A lot of these museums have turned away from that. And they postponed the Philip Guston retrospective because it was too edgy for them. It dealt with topical stuff that was happening around them. They weren't comfortable with that. The discourse is not controlled by a museum at this point. Museums would actually, I think, serve themselves by becoming relevant and stepping into this space and taking this on, because it's what the country is dealing with. But the museums not rising to the challenge, they're not going to stop the discourse from happening, because it's so broad now. There's such a pervasive discourse in the streets and on social media. that it's not possible to stop this stuff. The message gets out, and the museums are actually the ones that become sort of ossified. You know, they
Yeah.
become they have a potential to become irrelevant. And people just be like, hey, we're on to this new consciousness. We don't want to go to a museum and look at, you know, Navajo weaving. You know, I love Navajo weaving, but it may be not central to the discourse of what's happening right now in America. They might want to see something like a Philip Guston painting, or they might want to see a Kent Muntman painting, and they might want to see something which is speaking about this moment right now that everyone's experiencing. They can go out into a protest in the street and get this information. Why would they want to go up to a museum in Santa Fe and look at old, you know, baskets or something? You know, like, not to knock the baskets, but I'm just saying the zeitgeist of this moment is such that, you know, this message is on fire. Everywhere you go, this message is emblazoned on the public consciousness. And why wouldn't other institutions want to embrace that and become part of it? And in doing that, they kind of serve their purpose. They become transmitters and repositories of the message, instead of being scared about it, kind of shying away from it and trying to censor it. I think Mayak has been really good about putting controversial, kind of heavy-hitting content out there. I think you guys have done well. I've been in experiences with museums where they've kind of censored the artist at times and shied away from topical, you know, content-based work. Mayak hasn't done that. So I'm a strong Mayak supporter. You guys have done a lot for me, but also I think in a larger trajectory, you guys have done a lot for the audience by putting work out there, which is really hard hitting. You know, you guys have put out stuff which is challenging, and you haven't shied away from these things we've been talking about. So I actually applaud what you guys have done. And I think also there's a softer touch at Mayak with you know, the interesting pottery exhibits and the history of pottery and all this stuff going on. So I think you guys have actually risen to this challenge, but also maintained some of the softer, more beautiful moments of the history of Native people too. So I give you guys a thumbs up. Unlike the museums who didn't do the Guston exhibit, you guys, I think, have really risen to the challenge. And that's I guess the closing note is that I think as artists and as museums and as art audience and patrons and collectors, we need to rise to this challenge of what the country's going to be. You know, what is the country going to be? Art is this amazing medium where we convey these messages. We talk about these ideas. We imagine more perfect futures, or we talk about the history of people that, you know, where things have gone wrong in our society, and we reinvestigate that through art. We talk about it, bring it back out. And you know, as Native people in particular, we've had such a contentious history with America that, you know, we're both object and subject of American colonialism. We're both the artist who creates the work in the museum, and we're sort of the subject of the conversation that happens in the museum. So we're what Freud, you know, someone like Marx would call us the means of production and the product, right? We're actually both things simultaneously. And I think about Mayak, that there's a really interesting attempt to talk about that. That, you know, what does it mean to be both the medium of the message you're conveying and the message simultaneously as a contemporary Native artist? I think you guys have done that. So I guess that'd be my closing remark, is that I appreciate what you guys are doing up there.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching, and thank you, Mateo, for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having us.